Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm an author of over 30 published novels and a ninth grade English teacher. And on this week's episode, I have another educator and one from New Mexico. We're going to be talking to Santa Fe-based author Kevin Honold, and we're talking about his newest book out, which was a really fascinating read, and I'm excited to talk about, called Our Lady of Good Voyage. It's coming out right about when this episode will air. Kevin, go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thanks, DelSheree, for having me on your show. My name's Kevin, and I do teach in Santa Fe. I didn't know you were a ninth grade teacher, and so we have that in common. I'm the special education coordinator at a little public charter in Santa Fe called Tierra Encantada, and I just manage cases and work with kids at that school. And I'm right on the side. Those two things pretty much make up my life, I guess.
That's a lot to keep you busy, just that. I know how that goes. Our Lady of Good Voyage. I'm going to have some questions later for you about the path to this being published and the publisher, because I'm intrigued by their setup and everything. But before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about Our Lady of Good Voyage.
I'll do my best, even though it's been years when I'm trying to explain this book, it always sounds really weird and boring and kind of nonsensical when I try to explain it. I've never mastered that, but I'm going to try again. It's kind of a story of a journey. It follows two friends. One character named Kenny believes that he had a vision of Mary visiting him one night, Mary, the Mother of God, Mary, who seems to indicate to him that she wants him to undertake a pilgrimage or a journey to her, at which point he'll either ask her to spread a message to the world that's going to save the world in some way. It's kind of unclear what's going to happen when he gets there. And the other character is his friend Joe, who is not like Kenny, who lives in books and his imagination, but is very grounded, realistic, kind of cynical in a way that I think is fearful of life and taking chances and change and adventures and all these things that Kenny seems kind of fearless about. So those two contrasting figures kind of play off each other, I guess. Maybe sometimes I think of it as knockoff of Huck and Tom, where Huck is kind of like the straightforward, practical one, and Tom has all these magical, wild plans, like when they try to free Jim, and Huck decides they would just steal the key from the guy and unlock the door, but Tom would rather make bedsheet ropes and have secret messages and all this stuff. It's not enough to just do it, it's how you do it that matters. And in that sense, Kenny is convinced that it can't just take a flight to this place where he believes, which is in Mexico, where he believes that Mary is. They have to go there the hard way. And that's pretty much what the book is.
I comparison a lot. It really is a fascinating journey that they go on. I did want to ask you, before we jump into that, where did the idea for these two characters in this journey that they go on, where did that develop from?
That's probably one question I should have been ready for. I'm not sure. I think because I've kind of forgotten, because I started drafting this thing about 27 or 28 years ago. So the way I envisioned it then is nothing like what it is now. And I've completely lost the thread of where it came from. I think I just started to cobble together some experiences that I had and kind of thought, maybe I could work up something kind of funny around some of these experiences. And that's probably where it took off. There was no one instigating event or idea that put it in motion.
So it sounds like this is kind of more, it's evolved and developed over time rather than sitting down with outlined everything and had the structure and plot and everything ready to go before you started.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because I'm ashamed to say, even in like the earliest drafts, that there was some kind of, there was an encounter with Sasquatch. I want to emphasize that that's no longer part of the book because that was just silly. That's how long ago, how much younger when I started it. Really didn't have my feet on the ground with where this was going, just kind of, I feel confident that the final draft is a little more serious than what I initially set out with.
Well, I think sometimes you have to explore those random tangents and interesting, just kind of fun ideas at times to get to know your characters and then bring it back to the core once you figure them out a little bit more. That's kind of fun that this was a story about a journey, and it really took you on a journey as well as you were writing it.
I like that, the way you characterize it. And as you could probably guess, that I certainly didn't spend every day on this for the last 28 years, but just kept coming back to it. It just wouldn't let me go. And I knew there was something there, and I'm still not sure if there is something there, but I finally got to a place where I could put it to rest, because it's just, I think I was just kind of exhausted all the possibilities I could be reasonably contained in this plot for, to the extent that there is a plot. I should say that's really a weakness with me when I write stories. Plot is difficult. I don't know how that worked out. I feel like I concluded it as well as I could.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about the structure because it is a little bit atypical, especially from like commercial trade fiction, where a lot of times you have kind of, the 3-act structure, and you have genre fiction that tends to follow specific beats that readers are expecting, where yours is more in the literary fiction side of things, where you're not following a pattern. It takes itself where it's taking itself, basically, wherever the characters need to go. And I thought it was interesting you have the epilogue and the prologue, which are both set in the time period when Kenny and Joe are younger boys. And then through the body of the book, you have this period where I think they were around like early 20s-ish as they're making the journey looking for Mary. And then you have certain chapters where we come back to Joe when he's older and kind of reflecting back on this time period when he and Kenny went on this journey. So I was curious how those different structural elements came together as you were writing this over this extended period of time.
I think the childhood episodes were necessary because I wanted to illustrate that most of our lives, when our imaginations are most strong and kind of guide us and are kind of a way of seeing the world. And Kenny is the character who never lost that gift, whereas most of us, myself included, we get that beaten out of us at some point in life. But he somehow never loses that vision of the reality behind what most of us take for the reality, the really real, as philosophy might term it. Where Joe, on the other hand, grows into a world where he does what he's expected. There are rules to follow, and only fools and idiots don't toe the line. But Kenny is not even aware of these expectations or rules or boundaries, and he assumes the same on the part of every other human being, which makes for, I hope, some humor in that book. But as far as the structure, going back to your question, I wanted to make sure that Joe just doesn't appear in the book as his jaded, cynical, fearful self. He actually was that person once who had the capacity for seeing and feeling different things. And then he appears also as an older, after their journey, where he seems to be revisiting some of his choices about how his judgmentalism regarding Kenny. Throughout the book, he seems to regard his friend as a fool and an idiot, and he follows him just out of kind of dumb loyalty, or just because that's what you're supposed to do with friends. You just try to keep them from hurting themselves. He doesn't have much invested in it beyond that. But in the sections where he's older, he starts to reconsider some of those attitudes he had about what previously he thought was kind of crazy.
And I like that balance that you created between the two characters. Because like you said, we see Kenny as kind of more this fanciful, not always in touch with reality kind of person. And I thought that was most striking in some of the scenes where they encounter various people and they'll ask, what are you guys doing? What's this trek you're making? And Kevin will just jump right into, he had this vision and they're trying to find Mary and it's in the center of Mexico and we've got to go make it that way. Whereas Joe's response is often like, we're going to Phoenix to look for painting work or something like that. And he kind of tries to shush Kenny at times and get him to rein himself back in. But Kenny's often just like, well, this is what we're doing. Why wouldn't I share that with people? They asked, so I'm going to tell them. And it was interesting to see those two personalities kind of bounce off each other and how they reacted to different situations. And that set up so well the chapters where you bring Joe back in at an older point in his life where, like you said, like he's spent most of his life doing the things he felt like he was supposed to do. And that hasn't brought him the things that he expected. You know, like you have that in your mind. Well, if I do all of these things, then I get this. And that's not really playing out the way he thought it would, which I think for many of us, if we reach a point in our lives like that, you start looking back at how did I get here? Why did I think I was going to end up in a certain position or place or career or whatever by doing these certain things? It really gives you that chance to reflect on the story, but I think it connects really well with the reader to nudge the reader to stop and reflect as well about their own life and their choices and maybe how they got to wherever they are, which is, I think, always really appreciated, at least by me, when you read something that really makes you think more deeply about something and stop and consider that more profound message.
Yeah, and I appreciate you making that observation. And Joe is the law-abiding citizen. He's not a particularly good citizen in any sense, but he understands what he's expected to do in life, and it's always something he'd never questioned. Kenny is also law-abiding, but the laws that he follows are not worldly laws, but they are the laws of his some other world, some other order of reality. And I think most of us are. Or I should only speak for myself. I'm Joe most of the time, just going through the motions, afraid to rock the boat and following rules, and then before you know it, you live like that, and that's it. You really haven't broken out of any of those expectations, and that's kind of sad. I hope that in the book he kind of catches himself maybe towards as we get towards the end of it. But yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, and was that something that as you were writing over, like you said, over a couple of decades, was there a concept in your mind of having a theme, having this point that you wanted to get across, or was that something that developed through the writing and through meeting these characters and going through your own life? I'm sure, that's always an influence for any creative project, the things that we experience ourselves. So yeah, how did that develop over the course of writing this?
Well, I think, I wouldn't not, taking 28 years to write a book is certainly not something I'd recommend. I don't know, but the advantage, I guess, if there is one, would be that I was able to experience different outlooks. The writing of this thing carried me through a lot of different periods or different philosophies that I had and different attitudes towards life and meaning of life and different understandings. And I read a lot, obviously, during that time and did some dumb things and some not dumb things. And so it's what started off as kind of not whimsical, but kind of a humorous kind of book, got a little more serious. And whereas I started off centering on Kenny and his weirdness and his outlandish ideas, I came to realize that I was identifying a lot more with Joe. And yeah, and I think but not to sideline Kenny, because I think his vision became less kind of a joke and more deadly serious. I read a lot about in medieval philosophy. It's just something I like to escape into, and some of like the literature of the visionaries of the High Middle Ages, people like Hildegard of Bingen or writers like that, Anselm of Canterbury or people like that, who seem to be completely comfortable in this alternate order of being. And Kenny is kind of a descendant of some of those people, at least in my mind. And as I went through this book, he became kind of one of the inheritor of those kind of lost understandings that seemed to be a lot more prevalent at one time than they are now. So they're both characters, I guess, in short, became a lot more serious to me as the book went on, and maybe it lost something, and maybe it lost some spark for that reason. I don't know, but maybe it got a little heavy. But that's just a function of all that time that passed, I think.
Well, that's really interesting because Kenny does seem like a person kind of out of his own time. you don't really hear many people, like even religious-minded people, having visions, having some sort of manifestation. Like that's not something that you hear as a lot about in this current time period. Or, these quests, which seems like that was, and it's interesting to know you're interested in that medieval time period, because that's not something that felt like a 90s era person is going to be talking about and getting involved in, but it still felt very true to and realistic for his character. So I thought that was a really interesting balance of him seeming almost out of place in this time period, but he himself, like he was exactly who he was supposed to be. And I really liked that combination because I think there is some humor with him and just kind of his out of placeness, but it's so genuine that it does lend that sense of seriousness where you're not going to pass him off as like, oh, he's just some crazy guy. He really is invested in following through on this vision that he believes he's had and interpreted. It means something to him. And I think even with Joe, who kind of goes along out of a sense of duty and kind of protecting Kenny, he doesn't believe any of what he's saying, but there still seems to be this certain level of respect for he believes it, and he doesn't, ridicule him or be mean to him about it. Even though they don't share that same sense, there's still that bond there. And it created this really kind of fascinating interplay between the two characters of how you approach someone who you care about but is drastically different from you in many ways. Because that could easily, just produce conflict and drive two people apart. But they go on this really interesting, life-changing in many ways journey together.
Yeah, and what you said made me remember something that's been on my mind a lot in recent years is this idea of the disenchantment of the world, which I think originated with Max Weber in his 19th century book about, I forget what it was about. In fact, I never read it. I just heard that he used this word, and I started to see it more and more about one of the characteristics of the modern world being disenchanted. And maybe it's always been. Maybe we romanticize or idealize previous. But it seems like there were different ways of seeing the world in the past that have vanished. And Kenny seems to be kind of is atavism the right word? I think it is. Someone who embodies those, who kind of bubbles up to the surface after the modern world seems to have safely put all those silly dreams to rest. Here he is embodying those old beliefs. And I think there's a long tradition in literature of characters who are wildly out of place in the world and wandering through. There's a lot of possibility for humor there that I tried to take advantage of. But he wants to, one of his goals, the stakes for him they couldn't be higher. He believes that he can persuade Mary to share a message, not just to him, but to the world. And I should interject here that this is not a religious book, quote unquote, that Mary will share this message that she shared with him to the whole world, and therefore will save the world from the destruction caused by greed and selfishness. He literally has a plan to save the world, and it's all part of this kind of a result of this let's see, not that Joe is kind of like an agent of disenchantment, and Kenny has never seemed to understand that the world has been disenchanted by modernity and science and technology and all this. And so, yeah, I think that's hopefully another tension that's kind of built in there.
Yeah, Kenny seems to still hold on to kind of this more mystical almost view of the world, that we're not limited by what we can see and understand. Like there's so much more to it. You've just got to open your eyes a little bit more or in a different way to be able to see all of it. And I think that is an interesting message for people living in today's world, where I think there is a lot of disenchantment. There's a lot of frustration with a lot of aspects of modern society and how we live and interact with each other. And that was an interesting part of reading this, like I said, was just, making you stop and think about those things of why do we get so frustrated and feel closed in or isolated or any of those things that kind of make that day-to-day living a bit challenging at times. And can we look at things differently and open ourselves up to different ideas and exploration of whatever it is that might be calling to someone, to not just brush that off, but take those steps and see where it goes.
Yeah, and that with the disenchantment of the world, I think the kind of erasure of possibilities of other ways of seeing, and it's not surprising that this is where we are, because there's just a lot of money to be made by disenchanting us, disenchanting our world, our understandings. And by that word, I think I want to cover a lot of things, like religion, and we use the word mystery. And yeah, that the more people are focused on the practical reality and the here and now and the material side of experience, the better customers and the better citizens that they are. But that's not Kenny. He's kind of in a way not even aware of those forces that seek to disenchant our world. But we seem to, and this is changing, but we seem to leave kids alone. And that's another reason I wanted to add those elements into the book, because for children, that enchanted world is still obviously there, and it won't be long before it's removed. But there's a rare person who retains that, and you know them when you meet them. All of us have met that person sometime, and they're very few and far between, but they do exist. And I don't know what would happen. It'd be a sad world if we lost them, even though it might be impossible to be that person, or even you don't even want to be that person, because life can be very difficult for people like that, who kind of live in their imaginations. Usually we identify some kind of psychological disorder with that and give them a pill. But Kenny would certainly be medicated, and if this took place a few years later. But that's a whole nother story.
Well, and there's just so much to this that we could talk about, probably for several shows worth. But we are getting close to the time to wrap up. But I wanted to ask you before we do that about how this book came to be published and about your publisher. Because I noticed that it was the winner in 2021 of your publisher's fiction prize. So if you could tell us a little bit about that process and how you were able to bring the book out to readers to enjoy.
Well, I heard about this literature prize from Horizon Books, and I think they're in North Carolina. And I submitted this to that prize as well as to a couple others. And I had been for many years, and I'm glad it was never accepted or won a prize until it did, because it wasn't ready in the shape that it had been when I was first submitting it. But when you get the word that I got the word I won the prize, and then I immediately thought about these two characters who had been kind of like my secret companions for the last, pushing 3 decades, and now they were going to see the light of day. And it's kind of spooky, because a lot of times I never even considered the possibility that they would actually be introduced to the world, or that's probably taking it too far, introduced to the 8 or 9 people who might read the book, I should say. I'm just joking.
Well, I hopefully more than 8 or 9 people, because it was really fascinating, and I think it does make people think and consider the larger society as well as how individuals move through it. So I'm glad that Horizon has this prize. They actually have several contests that they run, I think for poetry, and then an anthology, which kind of caught my eye. They're a nonprofit publisher, which I think we're starting to see a little bit more of. I've encountered several over doing the length of doing the show, which I think is really an interesting and intriguing publishing model, because it seems to put the focus on the whatever theme or topic or direction the publishing house wants to focus on, and then also putting the focus on really supporting the authors a little bit more than sometimes maybe a more traditional publishing approach of looking at bottom lines and choosing what's currently the hottest romantasy type of thing to catch those trends. And this was interesting because it looks like Horizon has a focus on kind of expanding ideas and looking at both spiritual and just kind of alternate views of things, which is a really interesting area to focus in on.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful to them. They do make a lot of effort to support their writers, and like you said in there, one of the things that encouraged me to submit to their prize was what Luke Hankins, who is the founding editor, the founder and editor, said on the website about seeking out works that are spiritual but not necessarily religious, and I hope that I was hoping that kind of captured what I was trying to do. This is not a Catholic book, it's not a religious book, but it does kind of deal with those things, and Horizon is promoting and finding those books that are dealing with that kind of area of human experience that I feel like you said, it kind of is been a lot kind of sidelined maybe.
Yeah. Well, I hope people check both you and their other books out because they looked pretty interesting as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to remind our listeners as we begin to wrap up. The book is called Our Lady of Good Voyage by Kevin Honold, and it is available for pre-order now, and it is scheduled for release on August 15th. And Kevin, where can people find you online to keep an eye out for future projects?
Well, I don't have any social media, but if you went to, I guess through the publisher, through Horizon, I guess I would say you can just, I show up in my employment, and there's an email there, but yeah, I don't have any social media, and I should probably look into that. I hear it's really important.
It's kind of part of it these days, unfortunately. I go back and forth on how good or helpful that is at times, depending on the atmosphere of social media.
I could give my personal email is KHONOLD312 @gmail.
Okay, so if people want to connect with you and let you know they read the book or ask any questions, that's a good way to do that. But yeah, well, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today and talk about your book. I hope people stop and check it out and consider the interesting perspectives that you bring out with these two characters.
All right, well, thank you, DelSheree, for the opportunity to talk about the book. I really appreciate it.